This is the MeatEater podcast coming at you shirtless, severely bug-bitten, and in my case, underwearless.
We hunt the MeatEater podcast.
You can't predict anything.
The MeatEater podcast is brought to you by First Light. Whether you're checking trail cams, hanging deer stands, or scouting for elk, First Light has performance apparel to support every hunter in every environment. Check it out at firstlight.com. FIRSTLITE.com. Joined today by Morgan Fallon and Dr. Randall. Dr. Randall's just here to look good.
Yes.
If anything comes up that you need to talk about, though, raise your hand. Or just
I'll
jump
try
in.
to interject with some quips, some observations.
Please. Mo Fallon, man. I'm trying to think of where to begin.
Well,
Mo Fallon was the original. So a billion years ago, Mo. I'm gonna help you with your bio, then you fill it in.
Okay. Go for it.
No, how does it? Okay, Mo's a longtime producer, cinematographer.
Yeah.
If you've seen the movie, I know this. When you were a youngster,
Yeah.
you worked on the movie Ali, Michael Mann's Ali.
yeah. I was Michael Mann's assistant on Ali.
Wow.
Yeah, right out of film school.
Mo filmed 1 million episodes of Biggest Loser.
Yes, 96 episodes.
Mo, I did a show many years ago on Travel Channel. Mo filmed all of that.
Yeah.
Mo filmed all of the first MeatEaters.
Yeah.
A bunch.
Yep.
Traveled all over hell.
First 3 years.
Yeah. Mo made MeatEater look like what MeatEater looks like.
Yeah. I mean,
Well, you designed the look of the show.
collectively. Yeah.
I mean, a handful of
team.
us did, but you
Yeah.
you made the look.
Yeah. Yep. I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah,
With the camera, for
yeah.
sure. Yeah. The way the camera interacts, with you on the show, for sure. Yeah.
And at that time, you were already were you already working on Bourdain at that time?
Yeah. So I started working with Bourdain in 2008. So it predated when we met. But that was the reason I was able to meet you, was because I had done that, and that had gone pretty well. And so 0.0, the company that produced Bourdain, they called me when they hooked up with you.
God. Talk about, tell everybody about, just tell the whole story of the years you spent on the Bourdain show.
The whole story?
I mean, like, I don't know, give me like 10 minutes worth, man.
10. Cool. Yeah.
I mean, because that's going to land us where we're landing. That's going to land us with us, unfortunately, it lands us with us being sort of like reunited on our new project. But I mean, you lived a whole lifetime.
Yeah. It gets into all kinds of complicated stuff, man, because I'll start at the beginning. I got called randomly by a friend of mine who's the chief cinematographer, one of the two chief cinematographers for Bourdain, Zach Zamboni. And they had a camera operator cancel last minute on a trip to Egypt. And it was the phone call was basically like, do you have a passport?
Was your in?
Yeah.
A cancellation.
Yeah. And
hind titty.
They're like, do you have well, that's a tough show to get on.
Oh, I'm sure, dude.
I mean, dude, I was clicking my heels, man. They're like, do you have a passport? Can you go to Egypt next week? And I was like, 100%, I can go. And I went, and it went really well. With Tony, which is rare, he's like a very kind of particular person. There was a very set, kind of particular set of criteria that you kind of needed to meet to work on that show. Like he had to be able to hang out with you. You had to be cool enough to hang out. You had to not be a dick. You had to treat the people who are taking us into their lives as if you're a guest in their world, and not some arrogant TV producer who comes in and is just going to, stomp all over them.
So he was sensitive to how you guys behaved to the people you were around.
I think that was actually like the number one criteria, man. But if you think about it, it sets the tone for the whole show. The show is not us sitting, 5,000 miles away in my, office in Los Angeles and saying like, what is the story I can tell about these people's lives? You know, it was like the show was like, we are going to go here and we're going to figure out what the story is of these people's lives. And they're the ones that are going to tell us, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that whole tone was set by this idea that you're a guest, and you are a guest. You know, you're traveling around the world and absorbing other people's lives in a commercial enterprise. You can't be considered anything but a guest, right?
Yep.
And so those were a couple of like the just criteria he had set forth for like people who kind of fit on the show and worked. Well, I got that call. I did the show. It went really well. I think he particularly liked me because I was willing to risk my physical well-being and or life for a shot, you know. At the time, I was young and didn't have kids. So I was able to make a lot of stupid decisions I wouldn't make now.
Yeah,
but
you should at some point tell the story about Brazil.
Yeah, that was probably more me overreacting than anything else.
What's an example that comes to mind, though?
Well, I mean, that first show, we went across the Western Desert, or a big portion of the Western Desert in Egypt with the Bedouin, right? And they all uniformly drive these late 70s Land Cruisers, which is a super cool car. But and this is a weird little footnote. There are some places in the world where you go where they drive Land Rovers, and there's some places in the world where you go there, where they drive Land Cruisers. You know, and a lot
that's the world.
Yeah, and a lot of the world can be dissected by these two automotive choices, right? They're a Land Cruiser country, and and I had no idea what we were doing. I had never been on the show. It's like my third day on the show. I'd never been, worked on the show before. We're driving out into the desert, and I was like, well, I'll hop on the top of the car and, shoot shots of the cars, slowly picking their way through the dunes. And, like 5 minutes later, we're going 85 miles an hour. I am hugging for my life this 4-post bed that they, for some reason, had strapped to the top of the car, which I still can't explain. I think they thought Tony was some kind of like prima donna that was going to need a 4-post bed out in the, in the desert or something, man. Anyways, I'm like holding onto this thing with one hand, shooting with the other, and we get to where we're camping, and I've got this just massive bicep-size hematoma, on my arm.
Oh.
And Tony saw it. And that was it, man. He was like, started talking to me. He started asking me questions. He looked at me, all these like kind of novel things at that point. And I got a call from Chris and Lydia, the owners of ZPZ, after, and they're like, Tony likes you, which is super rare. So like, we're going to do this a bunch more. And that started 10 years of traveling with him. Now that's intermingled with when I got called to first work with you, which was Chris and Lydia called me, and they're like, well, maybe this guy will like you too. And they showed me that original presentation piece of you sitting in the park in Brooklyn. You grab the squirrel, right?
Pigeon,
sorry.
Yeah.
You grab a pigeon, you take it home and cook it. And they're like, we want to make this a show. And it just like it immediately for me, I felt like it immediately clicked. I was like, oh yeah, that's super cinematic, super dynamic. It's a really interesting philosophy. It's totally unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And they called me to come and do that original presentation piece we did where we were in the, in the swamp up by your house.
Yep.
And it was like, I think we met in like a Outback parking lot or something. And within half an hour, we were like neck deep in a swamp. And I was like totally hooked, man. Totally hooked.
That was the Muskegon River Marsh.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Muskegon, that's the county I grew up in Michigan. Muskegon, I should go fact check this. I've heard it my whole life, so I'm going to trust that it's true. Muskegon means, it's a native word that means big swamp.
Well,
I hope.
There you go.
I can say this. I can say that's what they told me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They told me that.
But the important thing about that, and the reason I remember that moment so well is just like it just all clicked, You're like, oh, this is like, this is kind of the best of both worlds because you wanted to make TV that was about like ideas, you know, and at the same time, like it had the inherent kind of action and dirtiness and kind of throwing yourself into a swamp that makes for good TV.
It's from an Algonquin word meaning marshy river.
That's a
Phil over
or
there.
Close enough.
Very
A
accurate.
little shit. Like Phil
description.
could get his paycheck just for doing a little shit like that now and then, man. Just saving the day. Tell me again what it means, Phil.
It's an Algonquin word meaning marshy river.
God, that's exactly what it is, too.
Yeah.
Wonder where they got it.
Never thought to look that up. Good job, Phil.
Oh, yeah. Anytime.
Yeah, they
I
really
would
had
have just
things
gone through
figured
life
out.
saying it meant big swamp.
Yeah.
And you would have been right, sort of.
Do I want to tell the? No, I'm not going to tell the joke growing up what it meant. You were through everything we've talked about so far. You were a camera guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you don't. For listeners, Mo is the most kind of bashful and modest. Mo, you were an exceptional camera guy.
Yeah. At this particular little niche of this world, very much so. Yeah.
Mo was a exceptional cameraman.
Yeah.
Was eminent. I'm combining nominated and Emmy, but I should just say nominated for Emmy. Did you ever win an Emmy? Did you win one?
I've got two.
Oh,
in two different categories and 10 nominations.
jeez. What'd you get the two in?
Got one for cinematography and one for producing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I knew you were nominated, but I guess I spaced the fact that you won one.
Yeah. Well, I sat through a lot of long ceremonies without one.
Where you get to the end, you're like,
You're like,
is it over?
That was 4.5 hours of my life. I think the best example of that is when we got nominated up against Free Solo. And
Oh,
so
really?
we went and we're sitting next to them and the whole time just being like, I mean, there's,
Yeah.
it's just like,
You knew how that was going to play out.
oh yeah. I mean, it's like take a canoe out against like the USS Lincoln.
Yeah.
We can paddle a good canoe, man, but I mean, like, there's only so much you can do.
You moved out of that eventually and got into producing,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
produced like a bunch of episodes
Yeah. Yeah. I
for
think that-
Bourdain.
that was kind of twofold. You know, I came up always in camera because during that original job working for Michael Mann, he had just handed me a camera at one point. He was just like, shoot everything that happens, you know, backstage, which was like not a normal film for cool shit happening backstage. It's like you're hanging out at the gym with like Ali and those kinds of things. So I filmed a bunch of behind the scenes stuff, and they used a bunch of it to make this HBO documentary about the film, and that's what got me started shooting. It's like cameras never required any real training or effort. I picked them up, and I just inherently understood everything I needed to understand to be an exceptional camera operator. And it just clicked for me, you know. And the 96 episodes of Biggest Loser, it's funny now, but that show taught me to shoot, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're 10 hours a day, you got the camera on your shoulder, and you're just constantly having to figure out the geometry of camera blocking and movement and telling characters stories and tying things in together. All the stuff that you need to do to be a good camera operator, we were just practicing it every day. And so when I got out in the field with you and I got out in the field with Tony, I was able to use all of those like narrative tools, as well as just at that time in my life, it was like a total athlete and a badass. Not anymore at all.
Yeah, you know what you should tell people about, because it's interesting about you is Mo. Your folks taught at a boarding school.
Yep.
And then you went to the boarding school.
I did.
So you were like a townie.
Yeah.
And a student.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. I totally know what you mean. And for anyone,
I don't mean you. I mean folks.
Oh no!
Yeah, like
for anyone
you were a townie student,
right? For anyone who grew up in a town with a boarding school, you'll understand the dynamic, especially an East Coast boarding school.
Yeah,
it's It is an interesting dynamic. I got the worst of both worlds. Yeah.
Oh, I thought you I think you got the best of both worlds.
I didn't get the best of both worlds.
The townies hated you, and the students hated you.
That's right. To the townies, I was like a stuffy
Silver
prep
spooner.
schooler. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to the students, I was like a faculty brat townie. I didn't realize, so it was miserable for the first 3 years, and then I realized, like, wait a second, I have a car, and I can go wherever I want, and I can exist with all the benefits of being from town, and I can choose from the flock of all these, really beautiful blue-blooded, prep school girls.
Gotcha. I gotcha.
So that
I'm tracking.
It ended up working out pretty well in the end.
And this is in New Hampshire.
It's in New Hampshire. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you grow up around Ken Burns, like in his zone?
No,
Am I making that up?
if you grow up in New Hampshire, you grow up around everyone else who's in New Hampshire, just by proximity, the size of the state. So he was about an hour away.
Yeah. And what was that lake you guys were on?
We're on Winnipesaukee. Yeah.
Oh.
It was a great lake. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Stunning.
How was when you got out of being a camera guy?
Yeah.
And you moved into producing? How did you ever get over the feeling of wanting to yank the cameras away from the camera guys?
Yeah, it was really hard for a long time, and created quite a fair amount of conflict with camera.
Sure.
With cinematographers on set.
Like, give me that thing.
Yeah, and I was a lot more fiery then at that point in my life. So I'd, like, stomp over and grab the camera and pull it off the tripod, and not good behavior. As I've gotten older and I've become more seasoned as a producer and director, I've learned to be much more mellow about the mistakes I see in camera, and much more constructive, and about how kind of interact with camera folks, and use the fact that I can speak their language in a way that isn't just like completely insulting and demoralizing to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
In total, how many years did you spend working on the various Bourdain properties?
10 years with Tony. It's like, it comes out to like 75 shows or something, that I either produced or shot, directed. For a couple of the shows at the very end, I was co-directing with my wife, which was awesome. Kind of the best part of the experience.
And then that shit was just all of a sudden just over. I mean, we've talked about it a little bit, but if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving people an idea of what, the degree to which any job for 10 years, but not only, any job you have for 10 years ends so abruptly and so tragically, but the way it was, the way that kind of work really created it created like a complete lifestyle.
Yeah, a lifestyle that was incredibly awesome. At times, and in certain ways, not super healthy. And an absolutely extraordinary opportunity to see the world in a way that only a very, very, very small handful of people get to see it. I try to tell the story of what it was like, and you can only really do it by, in a million different little pieces, anecdotes, and this and that. But you can't really ever, I can't really ever articulate the full experience. I try to tell people this thing that I think some people get and a lot of people don't, but there's a scene at the end of Lord of the Rings, right? The new movies, where they've just gone on this like unbelievable adventure that like really only the four of them understand. And they go back to the Shire, and they're sitting back in their favorite bar in the Shire, and everyone's carrying on around them. And they just kind of sit there in silence and look at each other. And I guess that's how I feel about it. There's a very small group of people who went through that experience with me. And when I'm with them, we understand each other and implicitly understand the experience we went through, the highs and lows, the ending, all of the things that came with it. But I can't, the world around that goes on in a way that I can't really see in the same way anymore. And I can't really explain it to the people, even the people I love. Luckily, my wife got to work on it, so she understands. But my dad asks about it all the time. I can't really fully explain it. I think I would imagine, and in no way am I comparing myself to a soldier, but I would imagine it's the same kind of thing that soldiers go through, where they can only really fully understand the experience between themselves, and when they're together, there's a comfort that comes by that kind of shared experience, and outside of it, there's a kind of discomfort. I believe we went through very similar things, on MeatEater and on Wild with Him before that, where as we tried to figure things out, how do you really explain, those experiences?
At that age, at that age and time, it sounds so weird, but I would have a hard time. I would have a hard time bouncing from the one world to the other.
Between the two worlds,
like not just going like. I wanted to be home and loved being home, but it was the pacing was so different.
It was super hard.
Yeah, it would become weird.
It was super hard, and for a long time, I'd come home and my wife would get in fights, and there's all kind of and I'm like, oh, it's eventually you realize it's all me and what I'm bringing back into the house. I learned over time how to decompress in the hour ride from the airport to home, and not bring it in the house, but it took me a long time and some more maturity to be able to figure that out, because for a long time I'd carry all of that energy back in the house.
Years ago, my wife told me, just detecting that little bit of anybody that travels a lot for work probably understand it, but like coming out of one's pacing, coming out of one thing and then moving into a household, especially with little kids. And you're with these kind of, you're with like really high performing people and a fast paced thing, and you're focused on a single thing, and you're kind of like camping out or living out, and all of a sudden you're in and like little kids. And I never called her bluff, but she would say, hey, if you need to, why don't you, when you come home, go stay in a hotel for a night?
Yeah.
Then come.
Yeah.
And I got the message, and I never did that.
Totally.
I think that would have been the one worst thing,
Yeah.
But it's like, but when you come in the house, man, you're walking into an active household with like little kids.
Yeah.
You got to transition quick. And the other thing that she'd always said is, she's like, if it's not a big deal when you go away, and you don't want it to be a big deal when you go away, you want to just slip out the door. It's not going to be a big deal when you come home.
Yeah.
Right. It's not going to be like balloons and shit. Right, you're walking into an active environment, and you got to get with the program.
Well, I was just gonna say, you're walking into a program, and I think that's the difference. And when you talk about like documentary, making documentary content, I think it's actually particularly different than other kinds of work too, because you're in such a reactive environment. You're constantly reacting to sensory input that's coming in the environment, and so you're super high key, trying to figure out all of these things, and what does it mean, and how do you navigate this to tell the story, and then there's logistics and physical, just the sheer physical nature of going out and shooting in these environments. All of it has you in this very visceral mode, and then you're like walking back into like a program with like really specific, structure and guidelines, and it needs to be that way.
Yeah,
and it's
10 at night, you're like, let's go get an ice cream.
Yeah, it's hard to code switch.
Nope, not going to get an ice cream. It's 10 o'clock.
Totally. So yeah, I mean that's definitely a big part of it. Big part of it all along in terms of making a relationship and like a household work.
And you filmed you did the last. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you directed the last ever Bourdain episode. Because the last one didn't become one, right?
The last two didn't become one. So
they didn't finish your Italy one.
No, it was shelved. It was.
But you wrapped the episode.
Yeah, we shot the whole thing. It was Probably from a selfish perspective, probably the best episode of TV I ever
No,
made.
I guess it makes sense because all
Yeah.
the post-production, everything, and yeah.
Well, we produced shows after Tony had died. Like I did a show in Marfa in West Texas. It was all inspired by the time we had spent down there. And that show, Tony died before we finished that show. And so you can watch that show and there's none of his kind of very famous voiceover. The show it's looser. It doesn't have that connective tissue because he wasn't around to record it.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of Florence, like there were things in the show that were just simply too painful to the people in his immediate orbit, or we thought could have been too painful to people in his immediate orbit to release the show. And so a decision was made just to shelve that footage. It was used in Morgan Neville's documentary Roadrunner.
Mm-hmm.
We used some of that footage, but it was, I mean, again, it was probably the best show. Like we had we like had the Uffizi Gallery shut down. We had it all to ourselves. You know,
I don't know what that is.
The Uffizi Gallery is one of the most famous museums in the world. It's like, yeah, you think of like the very famous Botticelli's like Primavera and all of those paintings are there. It's like one of the preeminent museums in Italy, and you can just imagine from there what that means.
They're for the world.
They're for the world.
Yeah.
So he's talking about the heart and soul of Renaissance artwork is all contained right there. And we had the place to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to some crazy places. Standing at the South Pole was pretty amazing. But standing in the Botticelli wing of the Uffizi Gallery alone, I took a selfie because no one else there. That's about as rare, unless you wax floors for a living. That's about as rare as it gets, So, and that's what I mean about like this opportunity to see the world in ways that who gets to do that? You'd have to be in the very, very, very upper echelons of society, which I'm not, to be able to
do that on your own dime.
Experience those things.
Yeah, to do it on your dime.
Millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of funding to shuttle our asses around the world, and see the things that we got to see. So
when you walked away from that, what did you start doing? I'm kind of getting to the part where you and me worked on our new project together, but did you just take some time off?
When I walked away from that?
No, I mean, not walked away. Whatever, it ended, I mean, that was your job, right?
That was my job. Yeah. There's some stuff in the middle there, though, that's like, that we've never talked about, that's like, I mean, it's probably shit we should talk about. Like, I had to make a decision at one point to leave, like, MeatEater and everything that we had created doing this in order to do that. And it was like a super, super difficult decision because here, like, I didn't create that show.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was a participant in that show, but I didn't create it. Like,
yeah, but that'd be like if we were like, but that's like the equivalent of you and me are like roommates, and all of a sudden someone buys you a house. I'm gonna be like, yeah, it's a bummer that you're moving out, Mo. But I mean,
this is where your humility comes into play, man. Like it's more than that. Like
I remember you like struggling with it, but to me it wasn't
Yeah, well, in the end, like it's a decision I had to make, right? Like again, I knew what was on the line. I had been on the show before, and when the show moved from Travel Channel to CNN, Tony was like, I want you to come like full time.
Mm-hmm.
And you just you can't pass up that opportunity. You can't pass up that opportunity to see the world like that. And there were a couple like career things like boxes I wanted to check too,
Yeah.
But it was hard, man. And it was hard to go like in that direction and go do that and then watch everything that you've built, subsequently. So when I got the call to come back and work, I was stoked, man. It was great.
No, the timing was, well, I don't want to say the timing was good because it was because of the things we discussed, like the fact that you were, I mean, this is years ago now, but that you became like a free agent after working on Bourdain for so long.
because I had been with ZPZ on staff for 14 years.
Mm-hmm.
which is still amazing to me. But then, after Tony died, I worked, did another 3 years with W. Kamau Bell doing United Shades of America, which was kind of an interesting thing too, because like that was very much focused not only on like American culture and like domestic issues, but a POV on American culture and domestic issues that I could literally never attain myself. So I'm not a black dude in America.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to go and travel around with Kamau and see things from his perspective, which was really profound. And then once we wrapped that show up, with another 2 Emmy nominations,
No wins though.
No wins on that one. I left 0.0 and went out freelance and started show running.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, there's a little time in there, which is good because I needed to learn how to show run before you called.
No, good. I'm glad you learned.
I learned a little bit.
So just for listeners, a little bit. Mo has talked when I probably explained this for him. I'm sure something's in the air and everybody's got like a. Are you having like a throat problem?
I've got a little tickle
No,
in my
but
throat.
Phil,
Yeah.
clear your throat.
Also
Phil.
never
Show everybody.
been nominated for an Emmy.
No,
Phil
or Randall.
They don't come together, by the way.
Dr. Randall, I have not been nominated. We got nominated for a James Beard Award, which you didn't get.
I was.
Did you go to that dinner?
At that.
Oh, we were at that dinner
No, I
together?
wasn't at the dinner. I didn't go to the dinner, but I remember when we got the nomination. I was
a couple
super
times
stoked.
never got it.
We were in Mexico when we got that first one. We were hunting turkeys in Mexico.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I remember down on that ranch down there. We shot a buffalo and a bunch of turkeys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give a brief bit of history here for folks. Mo knows this story, but Mo's been talking about 0.0 production. So just I try to explain a little bit of a little show business education. Generally, like 0.0 production is a television production company. How it generally works in TV production in the old days is that the production company winds up being like a contractor building a house, right?
Yeah.
A homeowner comes, they said, I want a house. I got plans for it. It looks like this. I'm handing it over to you. You're the contractor. You come in and build the house. Once you build the house, it's all set. You hand the keys over to the person that bought it and you walk away.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's their property. They might do more houses with you, but that's how it goes. You finish the house, hand it to them. For all you folks, I'm sure everyone listening, I'm sure, has seen episodes of No Reservations and Parts Unknown. So this company, 0.0 Production, produced all of those shows.
And it's important to note, develop the original concept too.
Yep, which was Cook's Tour.
Right.
Yep. So if you go way back, and I like remember, I vividly remember this happening, is Anthony Bourdain's book, Kitchen Confidential.
Yep.
I remember it coming out.
Yeah.
I remember being excerpted in the New Yorker.
Yep.
And like they came in, optioned it, made a deal, started building this whole thing. When we started making MeatEater with 0.0, we built MeatEater where we own MeatEater and just license it out.
Yeah.
So in the old days, in many of the first years of MeatEater, I made MeatEater as a joint venture. Like we were 50-50 business partners, and we owned MeatEater as a joint venture between me and 0.0 Production. Later, we had the opportunity. I was approached by a company that invested in digital media properties. So one you might know is they were invested in Barstool Sports and kind of were a majority owner in Barstool Sports. It was with the guy that had been the chair of News Corp, so Fox News, and they had a group called TCG. And we took an investment from TCG to build MeatEater into a thing. And then over time, didn't have involvement with 0.0 anymore. And over time, Mo didn't have involvement with 0.0 anymore. This is all a long rambling way of leading into this project that we're working on now, that Mo and I are just putting a wrap on our work on all these episodes. Is coming out of all those years of making MeatEater, I started talking to a friend of mine, Mark Pierce, who owns Warm Spring Productions, and some of the guys on his team, and we started talking about this idea of doing a show around outdoor mysteries, wilderness mysteries. And we had baked it along pretty good. Made an arrangement with History Channel. We're gonna call it Hunting History. We're gonna do it in partnership with History Channel, and eventually we needed like what's called a showrunner. You should explain what a showrunner is. I wasn't even really clear on what a showrunner was.
I mean, you can think of it.
I almost asked that a minute ago.
Yeah. It's basically like a project manager. So you just have oversight over the whole project, tip to toe, which requires a lot of different kind of skill sets.
Does that include like creatively what's an episode, what's not?
Yeah.
From that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very much so.
Mo was originally hired to be a director, and then it moved up to being from a director to moved up to being the showrunner, the kind of like primary driver of all things.
Yeah. And still directed the show.
Still directed the show.
Yeah.
It seems like it should be a more prestigious sounding title.
I know.
A showrunner to me would be like I think of like a bike messenger or something.
Then it should be
calls to
rebranded.
mind a very different set of responsibilities.
I know. It should be seriously
thank you.
rebranded. Yeah, showrunner. Like he's like a dude that runs around.
Yeah.
The title that people would see on screen is executive producer.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but anyone that knows show business knows that can mean a variety of things.
That's a wide catch-all phrase.
A tip for people watching, for all you people that love watching credits and movies, when you see EP, apply like a healthy dose of skepticism. Because a lot of activities can capture you the EP. A check.
Right.
A check can get you EP, or it's that you spent 20 years bleeding for a project.
That's right. Yeah.
Put your life savings, mortgaged your house.
Yeah.
In the end, you're an EP. Or later, it's all done. And you're like, oh, I'd like to be involved in that. I can be helpful. And then all of a sudden, there's an EP too.
Yeah.
And those two people are like, hold on, you're what I am? You're not what I am.
Yeah, and those
You didn't
lists,
bleed
those
for
lists
this.
are getting long. You see shows now, there's like 10 EPs. Like 2 of those people worked.
Yeah.
Everyone else was just attached. In
2 of
some
those
way.
people bled.
That's why well, I guess in all production, so it's not specific to documentary, but like fighting for those, like the producer credit, like that's what people want. If you want to be like Oscar eligible, you need that producer credit.
Oh, got it. Really?
So, yeah.
God, man, I didn't know that, Randall.
Some EPs, some EPs will have it, but producers, that's where it's at.
Oh, so executive is like a downgrade. You just want to be regular old producer.
Yeah, you want to be on that. You want to be the producer.
Gotcha.
So usually have one producer.
Because I was just thinking
10
it's probably
EPs.
not too late for me to angle for EP on the new show. But it is too late for the producer, and that's the one you want.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It's too late either way, Randall.
Oh.
I do have a checkbook.
When we started on Hunting History, when Mo came in, we didn't have our subjects.
We had a few of them.
We did?
They had done development work, leading up to that, and it developed some good concepts.
Yeah.
So, like, we ran with a bunch of those.
Yeah.
We certainly weren't going to throw those out.
Let's do it. Should we lay out the mysteries? Let me first lay out the kind of overriding premises. So on Hunting History, we explore 8 outdoor wilderness mysteries. I'll tell you some things that I would say are true of all of them. Okay, they could be mysteries that are 40 or 50 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them, they could be mysteries that are over 300 years old.
Yeah.
So that
Or many thousands of years old.
or millennia old.
Yeah.
You're right. They could be vastly different time frames.
Yeah.
But they share in common that these are mysteries that are set in wilderness backwoods environments, like some of the wildest, most beautiful landscapes in the country.
Yeah.
They are things that people will have. Hope you're following all these riddles or these clues. There are things that most Americans will have some little thing in the back of their head that goes, oh, I've heard of that.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
There's like oh, yeah, I heard of that. They're all things that are still being actively argued about.
Yep. Yeah.
Oddly, and this surprised me, they're all things that have obsessives.
Yep. Yeah.
They all have living obsessives
That's right.
who have dedicated their life or major portions of their life to push a theory. And there are usually other obsessives with a different theory.
And there are constantly new theories.
Yeah. Constantly new theories coming up. And so we found those. And to give you, we'll get into some of these, but to give you a sense of the range would be, some of the mysteries are like, some of the mysteries are just definitionally a mystery. Meaning, in the 1970s, we had, this kind of blows your mind to think this is true. In the 1970s, we had a rash of global and also national skyjackings.
Yeah.
It seems so hard to picture now in a post 9/11 world.
Yeah.
But there was a legitimate problem with people hijacking airplanes, globally and nationally. Hijack an airplane, get ransom money, try to get away with the ransom money.
For either economic gain or political.
Yeah. It became some like
or
horrific
ideological.
Yeah,
reasons,
it became some political political hijackings, the famous TWA hijacking, and then there have also been just some lone wolf financial hijackings, just for personal financial gain. Only one of these skyjackings, as they call them, only one of these skyjackings remains unsolved. And it is the story of a guy that identified himself as Dan Cooper. In the early days of the investigation, a journalist misheard a communication between some investigators, misheard DB Cooper, ran an article using DB Cooper as a suspect name. It was misheard.
Yeah.
DB Cooper did not use DB Cooper, used Dan Cooper.
Yeah.
He's on a plane that takes off out of Portland to Seattle. But what did he buy his ticket for? It's like it's
$20.
It's so funny, yeah.
Yeah.
$20, buys the ticket, gets on, walks in, buys the ticket for $20, gets on the plane. He's dressed in a suit, he's wearing loafers.
Yeah.
He hands a flight attendant a note that he's got a bomb. He opens up a suitcase, it's got a bunch of wires and shit, looks like a bomb. Demands a couple $100,000 in 20s.
Yeah.
The plane lands at SeaTac. He lets all the passengers go. He keeps some hostages on the plane, flight crew.
Yeah.
Lets a flight attendant go. She comes back with a big sack full of all of his 20s. I can't remember. We calculated how many pounds of 20s it was. Not as much as you'd think.
No, I'm trying to remember. It was like 22 pounds or something.
Yeah.
Shocking.
Asked for 4 parachutes. This is like some key stuff here. Asked for multiple parachutes, creating the idea that he's going to jump with the flight crew.
Yeah.
Because if he says, give me one chute,
like, sweet. You ever
you
seen
give me like, just give him,
give him the anvil from from Wile E. Coyote.
Yeah, it's like, why are you going to cut every rope in there, then give him the chute? Yeah. Ask for 4 chutes. They take off out of SeaTac. Yeah. He wants to go
Mexico City.
Yeah, he wants to go to Mexico City. They argue with him that you can't. There's not enough fuel on the plane. Yeah. They debate. So all this is important detail because he's taken off out of SeaTac and he already knows what he's going to do. He knows he's going to jump out of the plane and he has a destination in mind. They're already taken off and they're arguing about you can't do that. They suggest like landing in the Bay Area or something.
Yeah.
They suggest going to San Francisco.
Yeah.
He's like, it's too busy. He's like, let's go to Reno and refuel.
Yeah.
So now time has gone by. He's in the air. He wants to go one place. They change their mind. They're going in another direction. Point being, people argue this, that he knew what was up and had an accomplice waiting. The dude, this is one thing I'm sure about. Yeah. This dude does not know.
Yeah.
No rational person can argue that he knew where he was.
No,
when he jumped out of that plane.
100%. Yeah.
It was the kind of plane that had the back door that opens up.
Yeah. I mean, even if you knew where you were, even if you had known what route you were on, you wouldn't know where you were.
No GPS.
Cloudy night in the middle of a storm.
No, it was a storm. Overcast, heavily overcast skies, raining, and he's jumping out at where he's jumping out. It's like -0.
Yeah. 7 degrees. We said -7. I think is the number we came up with.
-7.
It's cold.
At the elevation he's at. And he's got a suit on and loafers.
Yeah, going 200 miles an hour.
Yeah.
-7.
There's a really funny part of this where, put all on the hold for me because I got to explain the funny part of this. When we're filming it, we're in the town of, we're in this area of the FBI's drop zone.
Yeah.
And we just are going to eat in this town of Cougar, Washington. We just like make plans to go into Cougar to eat. And we're sitting there and we're kind of outside the trucks and some guys got some cameras and here comes a dude driving by on a bike. This is the fun. Listen, here comes a guy driving by on a bike and it's just killing him. He sees the cameras and it's killing him, and he's like, he drives and you can see him change his mind and he comes back and he's got some shorts on and he's got a shirt, like a big shirt on, but suspenders under his shirt. Like suspenders under his t-shirt. And I said, he's like, what are you guys doing? DB Cooper. He gets all fired up about DB Cooper. And I said, what do you have? Why you got your suspenders on under your shirt? And he tells me it holds up my pistols.
Yeah.
So to give you a sense of how much like this story lives, right? We didn't get an interview with this guy, but to give you a sense of how much this story lives, this individual races home. This is just a guy on the street.
Mm-hmm.
Races home on his bike and comes back with like evidence.
Yeah.
Okay. About who DB Cooper is. It introduces us to a thing that totally messed with our heads. Because in all of our research, I was just talking about what he had on, right?
Yeah.
He's got on a jacket, he's got on loafers.
Yeah.
Okay. In all of our research, we never see any mention of this, but he's describing one of the last known moves of DB Cooper, which was to slip a packet of 20s into his wetsuit. So we get done talking to him. We're like, the wetsuit? Well, how did we miss the wetsuit? But then we went and reviewed, and that man, as far as I know, that man and only that man knows about the DB
wetsuit.
Cooper was wearing a wetsuit.
But I mean, but that's what's so cool about the story, and the
it's
reason
great.
that the story is so enduring is it invites all of this. You're left with so few clues that paints such a vivid picture of what this guy did.
Yeah.
That it's open to all this interpretation.
Tons of interpretation.
As we talk about in the show, it's a perfect story.
Mm-hmm.
And like, what a fun thing to be able to just like dive into a perfect story and just let your imagination go. So, he had a wetsuit on. He was jumping in the lake.
Yeah, and I'm
Merwin,
like, man, we're going to look like idiots. We never talked about the wetsuit. And then we back up like, scratch the wetsuit. That's just a dude on the street.
See what else he knows.
That's a dude on the street wearing shorts with pistols hanging from his suspenders. So Cooper goes on the back. There's always little details. Here's the crazy part. Smokes a cigarette.
Yeah.
Smokes a couple cigarettes, puts them in the ashtray. You know how even today you'll see planes that still have that little ashtray. Mm-hmm. Put some cigarettes in the ashtray. Yeah. Here's one of the biggest screw ups the FBI ever made. In not being able to anticipate that you would pull DNA off the cigarettes, which would now be a blink of an eye process.
Yeah.
Like the FBI lab would have the genetic profile of this person within minutes. They check them out. Nah. Burn them. Can you believe this?
Different
no
world.
one thought like in archaeology, it's very common in archaeology. Like if you're at a site, you dig a little square, you'll dig a meter square. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of it, you don't touch because you're like, I don't know, in 100 years,
save for a later
they'll be
date.
able to dip a stick in that dirt and tell you what happened here. So let's not mess with the rest because technology will improve. But now they're like, what are you going to do with these old cigarettes? Gone. Yeah. At some point, he takes apart one of the 4 parachutes and gets some cord out of it and fashions himself a little bundle of money and lowers that back door down and spends some amount of time messing around on the back.
Yeah, we should specify that it's at a time when some planes had the staircase that lowers from the tail of the plane.
Yeah. So
we're not talking about the side door at the back of a plane. We're talking about a staircase that lowers directly off the tail of the fuselage.
Yep. He expects the flight attendant to open the door. realizes that the flight attendant is not instructed on opening the door and in flight can't open the door and sends the flight attendant up front. So now he's in the back of the plane. This is key too. He's in the back of the plane by himself. He gets the door down and at some point climbs down, puts on a parachute and climbs down the steps. How the FBI would later determine what they would call their drop zone is based on like trajectory, flight time, and all this. But one of the key pieces is the pilots feel a pressure change in the cabin.
Yeah.
Suggesting to them that pressure change was that he's putting weight on the back step.
Yeah.
And when he jumped, the back step, the door goes boop. Yeah. Just for you folks listening at home, I just took my hand and inflected it at the wrist.
Yeah.
I did like a little wrist flick. That was the door coming up. And so they go like, maybe that was him jumping out. Let's take note of where we're at. That's the FBI drop zone.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not kidding. That's the FBI drop zone. Somewhere between SeaTac and Reno, but like sometime around there, because eventually they get like, well, shit, let's go look.
Yeah.
No, didn't they not look till they landed? Or did they go look?
They did not get resources out in the field to look.
No.
For
when did the flight crew go to look to see that he was actually gone?
Oh, a long time.
Yeah,
because I mean, you
he's got a bomb.
You can kind of defend that. Guys, as far as you know, the guy's got a bomb, man.
Oh yeah, he says everybody go up front, go up front. Yeah, no, I'm not blaming anybody. But I'm saying that became this hotly contested FBI drop zone.
Yeah.
Earlier we talked about everybody's got like a little bit of awareness of the story. I knew the story. I didn't know any of the details. I knew there was a skyjacker and I knew he jumped out of the plane. And when we got into it, and Mo and I are like talking, and other guys we work with are all talking. I would often say on the calls, "I'll tell you what happened." You know, having not been there, and knowing nothing about it. I was like, he burrowed into the ground.
Yep.
Didn't know what he was doing, had a bad shoot, whatever. And the reason he's never, because we should jump to this, he's never turned up.
No, nothing has ever turned up. Well, except
some
one
money.
thing.
Some money turned up. We'll get to that in a minute because we went to the site. Some money turned up in the Columbia River in the 80s.
Right. Nothing of his body or parachute or anything like that ever showed up. Yeah.
And people thought that, one investigator said, well, come deer season, we'll find him. Because he thought some guy's going to be like, oh my God, a parachute hanging in a tree with a dead guy from it, and it would be over, right?
Yeah.
That was the assumption early on. It's like, he's just dead somewhere and they'll find the chute. They never did. And I would have thought, well, his chute never opened, and he burrowed into the ground and
right,
all that soft rainforest moss, and you're hitting at 170 miles an hour or something like that, terminal velocity, somewhere, and you're just right. And unless someone looks in the right little divot, and that's where the money is, that's where his body is. And we kind of begin our exploration with that idea, and then quickly have special forces guys, military parachuters, a parachute instructor with like 14,000 jumps in his history, who was actually interviewed by the FBI after the DB Cooper thing. Them all say, no, he's probably fine.
Yeah.
No reason to think he's not fine. Like in their mind, it's like, no, landing in trees don't matter. Landing in the mountains don't matter.
Yeah, it's a parachute. They're like designed to work.
Yeah. It's like, no. I was like, well, what if you hit a tree?
I don't know.
Doesn't matter. Yeah, we couldn't get any major parachute dudes to tell us that he was dead. As much as I wanted to.
No,
so
but
like these chutes just work. They're like they work.
Community.
But
they're like the chutes work. You pull the cord, you're landing.
And I think the other interesting thing is like we had like an opportunity to like get you in the air, get you like doing a tandem jump, and your immediate reaction on the ground went from like before we went up in the plane, like he's burrowed into the ground, to like, oh no, he could, of course he could survive that. Like
now you're part of the community.
And I think that, and that's what's so fun about the show is like you you get to unfold these mysteries and kind of pressure test one variation or one possibility or one theory at a time. And over the course of it, you come out with a completely different understanding or a completely different viewpoint on it. None of it based on empirical evidence, all based on experiential evidence.
Yeah.
And I think that's that's the reason that, like, as a concept, I think this show is so cool, is that we're out there experiencing things and then making, assessments of a mystery based on those experiences.
And if he lived, and I think he did, if he survived the jump, think about
Now you think he did.
Yeah. Well, now I think he did.
Right. Yeah.
But then just like invite yourself to think about this for a minute. That you're somewhere south of Seattle, but you're not quite sure where.
Yeah.
And you've jumped in the dark.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, he never got caught. You're landing in the dark and not toward dawn. You're landing in the dark in the evening.
Yeah. It's a long night.
In your loafers.
Not rigged up, in the rain. Yeah, what then? There's talk of accomplices, and maybe there were, but like not to that point.
But there's no
way you could have coordinated with someone on the ground.
No, he'd need to get to a payphone at that time
Yeah.
and make a call and say, well, I think I'm just somewhere out in the Cascade Range,
Yeah. And you're walking around, and as far as you know, there was this kind of laughable delay in looking for him on the ground.
Yeah, it was partly because it was Thanksgiving night.
Yep.
So everyone had to finish there.
Yeah, everybody had to finish their
Finish their dinners.
dressing and pumpkin pie and shit, and they got the posse rounded up. He didn't know this. Like, he doesn't know this.
No.
So, like in all this time since, and they brought out the army. I mean, the army to do shoulder to shoulder was like 5 foot spacing.
Yeah.
I think fingertip to fingertip spacing.
Yeah.
Shoulder to shoulder. And they spent months grid working everything. No parachute, no sack, nothing. So,
I mean, they were doing flyovers in was it the SR-17 or the
71.
71?
Blackbird.
Yeah, they brought that up.
Yeah.
Use that to try to find the chute.
Big reconnaissance aviation guy here.
Like you just
Like on Dr.
You
M.
got it right. I
Favorite bands,
didn't
you
know.
too? Yep.
They nothing ever. We'll get to this money, then we'll kind of move on to another one of these just to give people an example. We'll get to this money. So here's the crazy weird part, and this is what really like the money. If the money hadn't happened, the story would be different. But the money
way
upends everything.
Yeah.
In the 80s, right near Phil's backyard. Phil, fill us in on this.
That's right. Vancouver, Washington, on the shores of Western Vancouver, I believe.
Do you know the name of the bar?
I don't know the name of the bar, no. So yeah, I can't fill you in. Sorry. It's an
bar.
Algonquin word meaning marshy swamp.
Tina Bar.
Tina Bar.
So the original, the skyjacking was in 72, 73?
72.
It was 72. Okay. I was not yet born. I wasn't even conceived yet, Randall.
Mm-hmm.
Where was I? Oh, the money. So
Yeah.
check this out. 81, was it? Somewhere 1981?
Yeah.
Somewhere early 80s.
Yeah.
Some kid. Now this is the surface. I'm telling you the surface level true part. And you can read in all the conspiracy theories. The surface level true part, okay, that everyone agrees is this. Some kid goes down on the Columbia River and they're going to make a fire. And he's scratching out with his foot.
Yeah.
A little fire pit. Okay. On the bank of the river, just like you would. And lo and behold, here is a bundles of rotten 20s.
Right.
When they gave Cooper all of his currency, when they gave him his ransom money, I knew they knew the serial numbers. Okay. Here's a whole other wrinkle. I'm going to get into this wrinkle because this is an interesting wrinkle. I knew as we did our research, it was like they knew the serial numbers of the money.
Right.
I thought they were sequential, meaning I thought they gave him
Yeah.
blank to blank numbers, which would make it easier to
But
find.
they just had a list of serial numbers.
but it was all random numbers. So you couldn't notify banks if you see any money come in between 110000 and 110
yeah.
keep your eye out for it. It's like thousands of 20,000 random ass serial numbers. So you could never get in your head what numbers you're looking for. Because I used to be like, the money never turned up, so the money must be gone. But someone's like, how do you know the money's gone? If he took that money and spent it wherever the hell, took it to the Caribbean, took it to Mexico, took it anywhere, took it to Greece, whatever, and exchanged the money, and then the fact that someone down the road is going to check that serial number against a list of 20,000 random ass serial numbers and find it. But anyhow, the money that comes out of Tina Bar, the corners is all rotten away.
Yeah.
But it's the numbers.
They know for a fact that is the money
It's the money
from the ransom.
But here's the deal. Like, the crazy part of it is that you'd say to yourself, if you're a thinking man, you're now saying to yourself, well, yeah, he lost some of the money. He drowned in a river and
Washed
it flowed.
downstream.
It was in a little creek, flowed out of the mountains, flowed into a tributary, flowed into the Columbia on a flood, got deposited on the bank, covered in sediment. But here's the problem. The money, if you drained the FBI drop zone, it doesn't flow to that spot.
It's upriver. That spot is,
That's what I was wondering.
is upriver.
It's up. The money was found up drainage from the entire FBI drop zone, which brings in the question. It didn't get like, it's either he didn't land in his drop zone, the drop zone's wrong, or someone
and
here enter all conspiracy theories.
So the next logical conclusion, you say, well, the drop zone's wrong. Again, he landed in some tributary, whatever, it washed down, got caught in a sandbar. It's totally reasonable to assume. Here's why the money being in 3 different packets is important, because they were not bundled together. Meaning the statistical probability of the 3 of them ending up in one place is in the billions to 1.
Unless something was holding them in it.
This is what's claimed.
There's a couple of little details here. He says to a flight attendant, he asked her, do you want some of this money? Okay. She says no. Did some amount of that money, like, we don't know what happened for a long period of time. Did some of that amount of that money wind up like, he's got like a bag, but he puts not in his wetsuit, but like, some of it goes here, some of it's in a different envelope, some of it's like, it sat there so long and rotted so much, something could have decomposed around it, what was holding it together. But people that are way obsessed about this have given up on the idea that it washed there. Yeah. They think the money was buried there. And what's so funny, we went there with a guy who's like, he actually had some of the money, like some of the money that came out of the bank.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name though. Eric Eulis. Eric Eulis.
Yeah, he's like the foremost, kind of citizen sleuth. What they refer to themselves as citizen sleuth.
Yeah, he's a serious investigator.
Yeah.
We go there and we're standing there on the riverbank, and I'm like, so it's right here, and he goes, well, it was about 9 feet up
and 25 feet out. Yeah,
because of erosion. Yeah. It was like the money was like over your head when you're standing there now. Yeah. He feels that money, because of all the stuff I won't get into, he feels that money was buried. Yeah. He feels it was buried by D.B. Cooper. Conspiracy theories are that D.B. Cooper later placed the money to throw off the trail. Yeah. That he got a ride from someone.
Paid someone $8,000
and said,
for
like,
a ride.
Dude, get me out of here. Yeah. And that guy freaked and buried the money. On and on and on. But that is the last. There's a necktie that he took off and left on the plane. Yeah. There's the cigarettes that are gone. There's the money in Tina Bar. Yeah. And they've investigated, I don't know, some 10,000 people. Yeah. They really focus heavy on disgruntled special forces guys coming out of Vietnam.
Yep. Yeah, and people with an engineering background or some exposure to Boeing, or people who would have proximity to understanding how the plane works in a basic way, and
Yeah.
it's fascinating. There are thousands of these little micro theories about little portions of the mystery, and the fact is, like, no one actually knows anything. I know nothing.
The flight attendant asked him, according to her, there's no witnesses to the conversation. She asked him, "Do you have a grudge against the airline?"
Yeah.
And he said, "I just have a grudge."
But I mean, those are the things. Like, and this is an important part of the whole story, is that he became like a folk hero.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he didn't
Victimless crime.
He didn't hurt anyone.
Yeah.
He got, you know, in our imaginations, he gets away with $200,000. You know, and disappears into the night. It's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
He's a hero. He's, you know.
Yeah. If you watch the news, there's always claims. There's been many, many claims. There's a theme. People's parents die.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
People's parents die, and then they come forward to say it. And recently, some people came out, and there's these kids whose dad actually did a copycat skyjacking.
Yeah.
And then later died in a shootout with the cops. And a lot of suspicion fell that it was his own copycat. Like, that was his second skyjacking. Some people say. These kids come out and they produce this parachute all the way in North Carolina or something, across the country.
Yeah, across the country.
They're like, "Hey, we found a parachute in our shed." Then you got to ask your question. But there's so many claims like this, they mostly get debunked. You got to ask your question. So you're telling me that he that night
brought his parachute?
He that night bundled that parachute up.
There's no way.
And then brought it home to North Carolina and put it in his shed.
It's like, I want to use this again.
No.
No way.
Like that one.
Sometimes
so
you
many
go
of
out
my
there
friends
and just rub that fabric between your fingers and think of the good old days.
Feels like money. So many of my friends sent me that article when that came out, because that was after we filmed. They sent me that article, and by that point I was like well versed in all of the claims. Just like there's a claim more than every year. There's a claim.
Yeah.
My boyfriend was DB Cooper.
Yeah, and a lot of deathbed confessionals.
Yeah.
And, you know,
anything you'd like to add, Grandpa? I was DB Cooper.
We should make a bumper sticker, man. You think about that with the parachute. We tried to walk through, like, one of the things we do in the show is, like, we walk through in the pitch black. We walk through those mountains, and it's staggering how difficult it is to walk through those mountains. I mean, we're talking about, like, the Cascades. Like, the best guess of the drop zone is that it's in the Cascades, just west, like southwest of Mount St. Helens, right? Prior to Mount St. Helens erupting. So it's like thick old growth forest and really steep. And just trying to walk through there in the dark with cameras, it was impossible. You're gonna drag a parachute.
Yeah. We did a thing, like we know you don't really know what he had, but we did like a no flashlight thing. Because he had just limited stuff. Like he's not like he doesn't have a big tool bag. Maybe he had a flashlight, it's unknown. But one thing I never did in my whole life was strike a match to look around. It doesn't work as good. Earlier we were talking about Indiana Jones. He goes into a cave and strikes a match, and it's like he's got like a spotlight in there. It's not like that.
All of a sudden you're in the Lincoln Tunnel.
Yeah, you strike that match and you don't see much of anything, man. It was fun. Okay, let's talk about Donner Party.
Yeah, Donner's a good one.
We should talk about Roanoke and Donner Party.
Yeah.
There's 100 of them, not 100. There's 8 to talk about. We're not going to talk about all of them. You want to talk about Roanoke or Donner Party?
Well, let's start with Roanoke.
Okay, I'll lay the groundwork.
Yeah.
We should quiz Randall on Roanoke.
Yeah, what do you know about Roanoke?
Yeah, Randall. How many settlers?
Oh,
Dr. Randall.
31.
Yeah.
72. 54. 139. I don't know.
You just went too high.
24.
I won't. No, you just
19.
went. I'm not going to continue to humiliate you. 117.
God, I knew it.
Rough.
I had it in there somewhere.
Roughly 117.
I promise.
We're going to go way back in time. We're jumping now from the 1970s to the 1590s. All your European superpowers, Spain, France, England, Portugal.
Yeah.
They're all vying for colonies, New World colonies.
Yeah.
The Spanish were early to the game, and they are getting loaded on gold. And
Yeah.
everybody's like, ah!
But down south.
Everybody's got bad FOMO.
Yeah.
Everybody's got bad FOMO. They want their own chunk of the pie.
Well, Portuguese are killing it in South America too.
Yeah, so people are tearing it up, and the English are feeling like they're missing the whole party.
Yeah.
And they don't want to go too far south because the Spanish at this point have a major toehold and like jealously guard their areas. Yeah. In fact, the Spanish are so worried about other countries getting a toehold that they got like warships cruising up and down the U.S. coast, hunting for anyone who'd have the audacity to try to get a toehold in the New World. England had sent some like expeditionary trips, poking around and prodding around. They map parts of the shoreline, and they get an idea that they're going to establish their first permanent colony in Chesapeake Bay. So they take these 117 settlers, kids, wives, young people, right? And they haul them over, and the intention is to bring them up into Chesapeake Bay. There's like some weird stuff that we get into in the episode, and they don't bring them where they're supposed to bring them. They're just like kind of like
They just drop them.
It sounds like a little like unceremonious because it was. I mean, they dump them out on an island in the Outer Banks
like,
of North Carolina. This will have to do.
See you later.
Like, it won't work forever, but it might work for a minute.
We'll see you next year.
But it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also important to note who these people are, because like they're not. This is not a military expedition. These are like farmers and craftsmen. They're not people who are equipped or used to going out and
no experience
building an outpost from a military standpoint.
Yeah, these are people who, by and large, have probably spent their life in within like some small radius of a handful of miles. Probably, you can't generalize, but like mostly these are like yeoman people.
Yeah.
They drop them on this island, and their leader is this dude John White. Well, they realize how precarious their situation is, and he can't even hang for long. And he's like, "Hey, I'm going to run back to England, and get some supplies, and I'm going to run back.
Yeah,
hang tight." He goes back to England, and like a war breaks out.
Yep.
And the Queen says no one's doing shit with any ships. All ships are fighting the war.
Yeah.
And all this other stuff happens, and it's 3 years. Yeah. And keep in mind, this John White dude, here's an important detail. This John White dude, his wife and daughter are there. No. His daughter. His daughter.
Left
is pregnant. Is there. Comes back 3 years later, is able to do a quick check on Roanoke, and they're not there. They're gone. But then there's a hurricane coming, and he can't even really look around. But as the story goes, carved down a tree. They made a plan. Hey, if you got to go somewhere, carve on a tree, crow it where you're going. And they carved the word Croatoan, which was a tribe that lived on modern day Hatteras Island.
Yeah.
A hurricane comes, he leaves, and then no one comes back for a decade or something like that. A decade. To by the time someone comes and seriously looks for these colonists, it is just like they are absolutely gone.
But gone. Like there's
just rumors.
It's not like there's a bunch of bones.
No.
Yeah.
There's nothing.
Gone. Just rumors. And it's so long has gone by that now there's like, it's this common thing that pops up in history. I'm sure you've encountered it, Randall. Oh, I did see a blue-eyed Indian.
Yeah.
Right.
Suggesting that they like integrated.
Yeah.
But just gone. But people are actively looking for their stuff. And what's funny about it is, like, of course their stuff gets scattered around. Because even if they had all died right there of some disease, even if they'd all died of, the flu, their shit's still going to get scattered around. Because this is like a vibrant, this area is full of all these different Native American groups.
Yeah.
So they're going to take the stuff and scatter it anyway.
And they show up, the English show up with stuff that is like highly, highly, highly valuable, because there's no way for Native Americans who are here to get,
Metal,
iron.
Yeah.
These things that they had, guns. So you think like it's not just like a bunch of random crap lying around.
Yeah.
Like, these are like highly valuable items.
Stuff that people want.
Yeah.
So the search has been, by and large, the search is archaeologists looking for their little trinkets and shit,
Yeah.
right? But finding a trinket, and we went to an active dig site where they're finding like really old English stuff.
Yeah.
But it's like they get excited about it, but it doesn't mean, in my mind, it doesn't mean that much because like their shit's going to wind up there anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because people are going to take that stuff and trade it. We talked to one researcher on it, and he's like, we're like, what would satisfy? What would satisfy you about what happened to someone? And he said, and it's cool because it's like identifiable. He's like a Christian burial.
Yeah.
A Christian burial not on Roanoke. Someone, because all the tribes had burial rituals where the bodies would be buried in a curled up in the fetal positions.
Fetal position. Yeah.
You know, buried in different ways. He goes, to find a burial, because he's like, they might have been integrated into a tribe. The last thing to go would be religious practice.
Yeah.
You know, in his mind, the last thing to go would be burial rites. And a mother burying her child, a child burying its mother, or someone would have laid them out on their back, flat, prone, head to the east.
Yeah. A Christian style burial done by Christians.
Yep.
Is what they're looking for.
And he's like, if someone can present that, they can say,
here they are.
Here's where they ended up.
Yeah.
A detail about that we get into is to kind of show you what's going to happen to these people when they land. It's within days. One of them goes out to get oysters. They got like nothing. They're hard up from the minute they're there. They got very little food resources.
Crabs.
Oh, it's right. He goes crab. He goes blue crabbing.
Yeah.
It just gets filled full of arrows.
Yeah. His head smashed. Yeah.
Because the dudes that were there before him, the English explorers that were there before him, do all this ham-handed antagonistic shit to the tribes and piss off a bunch of the tribes. And then you later bring a bunch of women and children and turn them out on the island.
Just let them go.
You see anybody, I don't know. Don't mention me.
And there aren't any like oral traditions from those communities around there about the strangers.
I'm kind of shocked by how it's kind of shocking how little there is.
Yeah.
How little there is.
Yeah. There are those rumors of like, you know, blue-eyed,
Right.
you know.
Square houses too. You'll see
Fair-skinned.
tribes will like traders would encounter people and they'd be like, but in wild places, you know, they'd be like hundreds of miles of inland. There's people in square houses living with such and such tribe and they have a square house, but it's just like, it's ephemeral.
Yeah.
It's like rumors and glimpses. As we dug into it, like, I'll tell you one thing's for certain. And I can't say much for certain. 117 of those guys didn't go somewhere and like set up shop.
Oh yeah.
And build houses. It
Was leave too
ugly.
much of an imprint.
It was whatever happened was like quick. It was ugly, and I think it was scattered.
They panicked and scattered to the wind.
And I'm sure some of them, because they did write on a tree. They wrote on a tree and on a fence post, Croatoan and then Croa, like on one side.
CRO. Yeah.
They finished it on one side they didn't. And that was the agreement. If you go somewhere, write it down. But then you're like, did they make it? How many of them made it? How many went to Croatoan? 5? Right?
Yeah.
You don't know. And then there's been fraudulent evidence. Like there's this thing that came out called the Dare Stone. This woman, Elizabeth Dare, wrote this like fairly plausible on a rock. Don't laugh.
No, I love
She writes on a rock like some shit, right? And a guy finds the rock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the timing of him finding the rock was at a timing of like heightened public curiosity about this.
Right.
Yeah.
That's when the legend started to emerge. And then you have a dozen copycat rocks.
Yeah.
So all the copycat rocks are obviously phony. And then the one rock is suspicious. And now people don't accept that rock to be true. But that rock basically said, like, we've been whittled away and killed and kidnapped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was like it was written to her father. And to me, though, I love I like the, so wait, like she's running around, running from these hostile Native American tribes
No, she was in their captivity at the time.
and carrying a
Scratching a rock.
25-pound rock around,
Yeah, man. What else you gonna do?
slowly scratching her story into it. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems implausible.
We need to go quickly. Get the rock.
It seems implausible. We talked to these one authors. They kind of laugh about it's called the Dare Stone. They laugh about the Dare Stone. You got to have a pretty sophisticated understanding of the language at the time. But one of the things they laugh about the Dare Stone is it like a decent analogy would be, let's say I were to talk to you in a Southern accent,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And a Southerner doesn't think I have a Southern accent. The writing on the Dare Stone is so like stereotypically,
Ye old English.
Yeah.
adding yees, like all over the place. They're like, it's like someone who's like read some Shakespeare or something trying to write a note
Oh, that's great.
in Shakespeare language, or whatever. And that's one of the better indictments of it. The other indictment would be this play comes out.
Yeah. Right at the same time.
Yeah, this very popular performance comes out.
It's still running today.
And the fervor of the popularity of this, there, lo and behold, is the Dare Stone.
Mm.
Yeah. But again, I mean, these are not selected because they're like finite mysteries. They're selected because they're mysteries with all kinds of possibilities.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it fun,
Yeah. I don't think that one will be solved.
No.
And just a spoiler alert, that's what I say in the end. I'm like, I don't think there's like a thing. When you look at it, like there's a lot of people looking and a lot of people ask the question, but there's not a clean answer. I don't think there's a clean answer.
Right. But in the questions I'm asked for a long time. But I think what was really cool about this concept and really unique to this concept is no one's really asked those questions from an outdoor standpoint.
Yep.
So these are all mysteries that have a element of the outdoors, right? In wilderness. And no one's really approached them from that point of view. And it's a lot of what we spend our time in the show doing is like living these things and going through to the best of our ability the things that those people went through or it's suspected that they possibly went through.
Yeah.
Theorizing they went through.
But going to the real places kind of
Right.
blows your mind. Because there's this one theory that emerged. They said, even though they had written that stuff on the thing, there was also an expression of intention that they moved 50 miles to the main.
Right.
Which you can take it different ways. One interpretation is they went 50 miles inland.
Yeah.
Which lands you in this place we went to, which is called the Great Dismal Swamp.
Yeah.
And, and you go into that stuff, you're like, oh yeah, you got 100 like kids and stuff, and you're all wearing like petticoats or whatever the hell they ran around in, and like you're navigating you're like wading through the Great Dismal Swamp.
What's kind of amazing though is when we went there, you go there now and there's a bunch of dry land there, a bunch of agricultural land, but all of that land was drained.
Yeah.
That was all just swamp. Like when you think of the prototypical swamp, like Kermit the Frog at the beginning of the Muppet movie level swamp, like that's what it was. Lily pads and cypress trees, that whole area.
Yeah. It's an hour-long show. You can't explore any avenue of this, and this would have been like way down the list for how sort of outside of the story it was. But that area, some of the most harshest slave conditions.
Yes.
In the history of slavery in the South, some of the most harshest, like high death rate slave conditions was making that dry land.
Yeah.
They were put to work draining that land.
Yeah.
And these malarial conditions.
Those canals are all still there, just crisscrossing the land. You see those canals that they dug, and imagine the conditions under which they were
Just how
compelled to do that
expansive
work.
it is.
It's just
You're looking at
horrifying.
just many square miles upon square miles upon square miles. It was hand dug trenches to drain that ground.
Yeah.
It was just like a disposal place for humans.
Yeah.
That you just pour into you're pouring them into a war, pouring slaves into that job. Which, like I said, wasn't a lot of room to. maybe a future episode. another one of going to the spot. We'll talk about this one. Then
Yeah.
we'll wrap it up. Is going to Donner Pass.
Yeah.
Where the Donner Party.
Yeah.
Where that all went down. And
Yeah.
one of the funniest things just happened in the parking lot. It's not in our show because it just happened in the parking lot. We ran into some guys. They were filming. They were doing like some ski stuff or something. I can't remember what they were doing.
Yeah,
And we
like
got talking to them. They were talking about. So this is like a third hand story. Because we're out filming in Donner Pass,
man.
and they're filming like some skis, nothing to do with Donner Party. We're filming about the Donner Party, and they're filming some ski stuff.
yeah.
And they share with us these people that they had encountered who were in Donner Pass because they were doing a thing about places with Christmas names. You know Donner and Dancer. That's the funniest thing in the
That's
world.
amazing.
That's pretty amazing.
Background on Donner Party. Donner Party was, well, first off, I'm gonna talk about what, before I get into what it was, I'm gonna talk about what everybody knows, including me. What I know about the Donner Party is it was an American horror story where people ate each other.
Yeah.
Full stop. Right? You're like, yeah. They got stuck in the mountains and ate each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yuck. Right? That's the story. Therein is the story. It's a very short episode. That's the story of the Donner Party. That's what I went into it knowing about. I was actually like a little skeptical because I was like, what is it? What is there really to do? So
No, I think we were all like, that was a show that we pitched many times, like a concept that we pitched many times. And the question we all had was like, well, like, what's the story? Like, what's the mystery?
mm-hmm.
What's the story? They got snowed in, they ate each other. Well, I don't, what are we going to do?
Seems pretty straightforward.
It ain't. It ain't. There's a lot
not
of
at all.
like, who's to? Here's the questions. Who's to blame, and what could they really have done different, right? And why did what happened happen? And now I'm gonna set a little bit of the scene. Is like 1846, so pre gold rush. Like everybody's heard of the 49ers,
Yeah.
right? Remember we had Elliot West on. He goes, everybody likes to talk about the 49ers. But the lucky ones were the 48ers. The 48ers got all the gold. The
Right.
49ers
They were late.
were
Yeah.
a little late.
So these folks were hopeful 48ers.
Yeah. So these guys, the Donner Party, they're coming over in 1846. And the way these immigrant trains worked, as I learned through this project, is like they're like there's a fluidity to how these groups come together. There's a kind of rough timeline. Like if you're going to cross the Great Plains and cross the Rockies and cross the Sierra Nevada, it's like you got to get going as early in the spring as you can to have the maximum amount of time so you can cross the continent and get there before snow. But you can't leave until the ground dries out. So it's hard to get going in March because you're going to encounter flood swollen rivers, right? There's mud everywhere. So you got to be like, shit's got to dry out. And there's a race. It's like stuff dries out, water levels come down from snow melt, and all of a sudden it's a good time to go. And then you haul ass. And then on the other end, you're bracketed in by the coming of bad weather. So there's like, you pick your window. And groups come together and they meet in these certain spots. What was the big town everybody took out? These guys all took out of us, not Springfield, Missouri.
Independence.
What's that?
Independence.
Yes. I think that's it where they took off from. Anyways, you
I
come
think
together
so.
and you form your parties
Looking
come
good isn't the
together
only thing I do.
and family groups form up, right? So when you cross in a wagon train, you might be with your extended family. It's you, it's your brother, it's your brother's wife and kids, it's your mom and dad, it's your uncle and his family. But then you join up with all these other family units. So you're in a party, but you're loosely bound.
Family units and bachelors and all kinds of different folks.
And guides, and hopefully a guide that's been there before. And there's like you're literally taking votes to put forward like a leader. So when we say the Donner Party, it winds up being 90 some individuals.
Yeah.
Of like two primary clans, but then a bunch of other people kind of surrounding these clans. And they get all the way out to They get all the way out to Fort Bridger, and they are fed some bad information about a thing called Hastings Cutoff.
Yeah.
What's super funny about Hastings Cutoff is it was billed to them as shorter and easier. Okay, this is the great part of this. It's way harder. And now that you can like measure stuff accurately, it's
And
not
longer.
shorter. It's longer. The Hastings Cutoff, which is shorter and easier, is
one of those-
longer and harder.
Yeah.
Pretty rare in the world of cutoffs.
It's like a shitty long cut.
Yeah.
And they have a lot of internal division. Donner's wife, for instance, is like, I don't think we should do it. But this is crazy because Jim Bridger gets rolled up in this whole thing. Jim Bridger, all these wagon trains are taking a route that's causing them to bypass Fort Bridger. Bridger, who's already a compromised individual in some ways, because famously it was Jim Bridger who abandoned Hugh Glass in the whole Revenant incident, right? So Bridger is or isn't like the world's greatest guy. Bridger is like, shit, now no one goes by my fort anymore. And he's like, Hastings Cutoff sounds great. It goes right past my fort. You guys should definitely take Hastings Cutoff and stop by. We'll trade. I'll sell you some shit. And they do this. And when they leave on Hastings Cutoff, here's the crazy part. So like other wagon trains, at the time they go south on Hastings Cutoff, which is going to go over the Wasatch Range and then through Donner Pass. Well, it joins back up before Donner Pass. Anyways, there's other wagon trains that they're with. The wagon trains they're with that don't take Hastings Cutoff make it to California just fine. Going over Donner Pass.
Yeah.
So they do this south loop and it sets them back so far and they encounter so many weird problems that they wind up behind other parties when they go up Donner Pass. So they're not pioneering Donner Pass. Donner Pass has successfully been used.
Been used in years prior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they start up in the snow and they get
Well, it's like important to note too. It's not that they actually don't arrive at the bottom of Donner Pass particularly late, despite all
that's
of their
true.
problems.
Yeah.
It's the end of October.
Yeah, it's an early storm.
Right. Parties had crossed as late as December.
And you're
and
right.
been okay.
In years past.
Yeah.
I forgot that detail. Yeah, that's another thing is like, that's a great point. Because you also there's this kind of narrative that they were, like I was just laying out.
Like stupid to go up there.
Yeah, they were late. They were late, but it had been done. They
Yeah.
were late, but it had been done. But then they got up in the mountains in a situation where it was just insane snow. It was an abnormal snow year.
Yeah.
And they
Abnormal
lingered.
and
They
early.
got up there. It was an early snowstorm. Perhaps they could have backed out, but they felt that they'd get a thaw. Right? What are the odds it's going to keep happening? Right? Yeah, all the time. Like living in the Northern Rockies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all of a sudden October, like whap, big old storm. And then like a month later, it's like 70 degrees.
Yeah.
And you're like hunting in your t-shirt and you're like, God, isn't that weird? It was like 2 feet of snow here a couple weeks ago. They thought it'd be that, but it just got worse, deeper. And they lingered too long and then it became impossible to back out.
And when you talk about worse and deeper, like the numbers are astounding. Like the amount of snowfall in that area.
Yeah.
So they'll get 60 feet of snowfall
Yeah.
in Donner Pass.
They're climbing. They make all these little shelters. We'll talk about those in a minute. They're getting to where they're climbing tunnels up out of their shelters.
Yeah.
You climb out and pop out on the surface. And they're cutting wood. There's pictures later where there'll be a dude standing on dry ground.
Yeah.
And way up above his head is a cut off tree.
Yeah, 30 feet. Yeah.
And you realize that's where they were cutting wood.
Yeah.
Walking around on top of all that snow. But here's where all this whole Donner Party shit changes for me is it's 90 people, over half are little kids. You never think about that.
No.
No one ever thinks about it's little kids.
Yeah.
And like statistically, the little kids were more likely to survive. And also statistically, parents of little kids were more likely to survive.
And statistically, women were more likely to survive.
More likely to survive.
The people who fared the worst were unattached bachelors.
Yeah. a handful of reasons, like supposed reasons why. They were already working their asses
Very
off.
fatigued from the trip out that far.
They were assuming all this work, doing all this stuff. So they're going into it very lean. Meanwhile, people who have been able to ride in the wagons weren't as physically depleted. There's also like a little bit of a psychological element. There winds up being this group decides eventually to make a break for it, and it's called the Forlorn Hope Party. And they make a break for it in the California direction. They're going to cross Donner Pass. They're almost to the top of Donner Pass. They're going to cross the pass and go for it
on foot.
Yeah, on foot. They make snowshoes. They think they'll be there in some number of days. It takes weeks. Of the people that left on that Forlorn Hope Party, parents lived. People with relatives at the camp.
Yeah.
Other people just are like, fuck it.
And just died.
You know, because they probably got where there was no point. You know? And there is cannibalism, but it's like, you know, these people were condemned for a long time for it. But when you start looking at it, I was like, you start getting into it, like, they did everything they could possibly do. Everything they could possibly do to keep their families alive. And I don't think anyone would do anything differently.
I think the only thing that would be done differently in a modern context, and I mean this in all seriousness, is that the cannibalism would have started much earlier. I think that you're talking about a time when people are, you know, we talk about in Roanoke, like the last thing to go are religious practices. These are people who are highly religious and highly driven to live by that code, and that code is very specific about eating other folks, you know, and they hold on for what would seem like forever, just a torturous amount of time of starving to death, trying to scrape food together in any way they can before they start eating people.
Yeah. There's one dark element to it. It seems like no one really knows all the details, but if you look at all the journals and evidence and all that, it seems like cannibalism, with one exception, cannibalism was limited to people eating people who had starved to death.
Right.
Okay. They're eating people who had starved to death. But there's a guy in the Donner Party who's kind of like throughout the whole story kind of emerges as a real asshole. He murders 2 Native American guides.
Yeah.
That they have. But at that time, that was not illegal. It would have been illegal to shoot someone's cow. It was not illegal to murder 2 Native Americans. He outright murders 2 Native Americans to eat them. And then later, everybody knows that he did, and he just lives his life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not picked up. They talked about doing something. No one ever did anything to that dude.
Yeah.
And there's also all these other crazy stories, like one of the search parties, as it's told, like it was quite a sight when search parties started to come. But when search parties came, they had to kind of ferry them out. Like a search party shows up and they can only take a handful of people. So they're like, okay, everybody wait here. They take a handful of people to California, come back. One time they come back, and as the story goes, here's a guy walking along with a human leg.
Yeah.
And sees the search party people and has the wherewithal to throw it down in the snow.
He's like,
"What to see here?"
My dog tries that trick.
Like he got busted. We met with the archaeologists that dug one of the camps. They were at 2 primary camp locations, and they dug one of the camps and found the remains of all kinds of stuff that they were eating. At one point, early on, they killed a bear. They killed a grizzly early on. They killed dogs. They had oxen. They killed. They had
like lots of small game,
Yep.
deer,
rodents and stuff.
Yeah.
They were killing, and they were one of the things they were doing is they were eating animal hide. So early on, they had no way to feed their oxen, so they were killing the oxen and just eating the meat. And then later they started revisiting it and they started eating the bones. But when they killed them, they used the hides to help them make roofs and doors on structures. They were like making like tent-like structures with hides. We made one of these structures with this rotten-ass cowhide and slept in there.
Dude, it was
one of the worst smelling sleeps I ever had, dude.
It was hard. It was
rotten cowhide.
Yeah.
And we used it for a shelter. It was a great shelter. I mean, you could keep a lot of warmth in that thing with a fire. Like you could make it warm in there, but it stank. We had like a little chimney and stuff coming out of there. So, the hell's I getting with that?
We
Was
were,
it a song?
we were talking about the animals that they
Oh,
found in
the
the
hides.
excavation.
They started eating the hides.
Yeah.
And then they started boiling the bones and crushing the bones and boiling them and eating the bones. And there's a thing I read after the fact that I really wish I had read before we did it.
Yeah.
A guy happens to give me, one of our podcast guests, Randy Brown, gives me a book called Death on the Barren Ground. And it's a journal it's a journal of one guy who was in a party of 3 people and they all starved to death. The youngest guy lives longest, and he keeps a meticulous journal chronicling the starvation death of his 2 companions and then chronicling his own death of starvation. Okay, and they all die in the 1920s in the Canadian Arctic along the Fallon River. It's so crazy because they wind up eating that exact same diet. They had been trapping, so they had wolverines and stuff, and they're eating wolverine hides, weasel hides that they had built up before they started to starve to death, and they're eating bones. And what's killing them, like they're dying of starvation, yes, but what's really killing them is these terrible bowel obstructions.
Yeah.
Because they're eating that boiled, crushed bone in the absence of other stuff. They're trying to build makeshift enema devices.
Mm-hmm.
And they're literally digging out of each other's rectums dried gobs of crushed bone and like that are forming into these gelatinous balls from that boiled animal hide. And then the hair follicles, because you're scraping the hair away, but there's all that hair follicle, and that hair follicle is joining up into balls of hair. When they find these guys' bodies a couple years later, the Royal Mounted Police do like a report. They are nothing but skeletons, but there's still what he describes as a plate of excrement in the cabin of this bone
It's
ball.
like old-timey concrete.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In your butt.
They talk about.
And I didn't, and
Sounds
so
great.
we met with an archaeologist who worked on this bone project. And then I later was like, after we got done filming our episode, I sent her, I was like, hey, for your work, here's this great journal of like what happens when you eat these diets. And like, that's what's killing those guys. These guys, these Canadian Arctic guys, what's killing them, they would have died anyway. But what's like the immediate biggest problem is that the bowel obstruction and digestive problems of eating like non-edible, eating non-digestible stuff in a state of desperation.
Yeah, they talk about, in Donner, they talk about boiling those bones so many times, boiling and reboiling, that they get something called pot polish, which is like they basically turn to porcelain in that pot as they try to extract whatever nutrients they can out of what's left of the bone.
We boiled up some rawhide.
Yeah.
And it like, you can make it pretty edible, man, when you boil it down.
It's actually not that
It's
bad.
like, winds up being like quite flavorless. And it has a most at a umami quality.
More the broth.
That wasn't the rotten hide that's used for the shelter.
We
talked
talked about it. We didn't. We just
Nah.
we had some just raw. We had
I
some
don't think that
standard
would have been
rawhide.
safe for consumption.
Yeah, we had some. We had a handful
Bet
of
if you were
rawhides.
starving out there, you'd eat it.
Yeah, we did some snowshoes. They made snowshoes. We mocked up some snowshoes. We worked with a guy that spent a lot of time hiking the path, yeah, man, being in Donner Pass. You're like, there ain't, I can tell you one thing, there ain't shit to eat here.
No, man, we went out, we tried to hunt squirrels, small game. You end up like in an hour, you burn more calories than you could possibly hunt, for the whole day.
It's just like,
You
it's
could
just
bring in.
it's subalpine. It's
Well,
like,
it's
rock.
11
it's rock
or
and
12,000 feet.
Yeah.
Something
No,
like that.
no,
it's not that high.
It's not that high.
It's not like that. I mean, at a certain point, it's like almost like, what's the difference?
Yeah.
It's like, it's subalpine. It's like 50% of every surface is rock.
Yeah.
And you got little like dwarfed up spruce and fir.
Yeah.
And there's some ponderosas here and there, but it's just like a very poor ground. And you talk to guys there, like we talked to hunters there, and hunters are like, dude, the first whiff of snow,
Yeah, everything vacates.
nothing is up here.
Yeah,
Nothing is
it's
up
the
here.
highest snowfall in the country.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
they're like,
it's
you get
everything gets
deer
out.
come up in the summer,
Yeah.
but they're gone early.
Yeah.
There's just nothing. There's nothing. I mean, they killed like a some crows, whatever, here and there.
Yeah, but again, nothing that was enough to replace the calories they were burning on it. So it's what was fascinating to me about that story is like you go in, you know, and I think this is like throughout the series, you go in like with one concept, you know, you're like, Donner Party, you know, it's cannibals. Like I get it. Like you don't get it at all. When you do the research and in conjunction with doing the research, spend time in the place, trying to do the things that they have done, you have a completely new perspective on it. And so you go into the story being like, wow, what a bunch of like fools that ended up eating each other in the mountains. And you come out of it being like, wow, what a bunch of heroes.
Yeah.
You know, this is the level of heroics that went into saving those kids. There's this great story about one of the women who stayed back at one of the two sites, which was Donner Lake. It was right at the end of Donner Lake. She's basically responsible for all these kids, you know. She delivers, as the story goes, she delivers the last kid to that rescue party and then just leans up against the cabin wall and dies. You know, and it's the story is like full of these little sub stories like that just I find like incredibly moving and like a total rewrite of what I understood of that history.
Yeah, I kept vowing that I was going to stop making any and all Donner jokes. Like Donner family Christmas, Donner dinner party.
Short-lived resolution?
No, I stuck to it.
Oh.
Now, when we were joking, like, did you know that Saddam Hussein has books of poetry? So just like you could say, like, you know, the poet Saddam Hussein.
Mm-hmm.
No one says that, right? He has a novel. So you could say the poet and novelist Saddam Hussein. You'd never say that. So now, when someone said,
fine artist Hitler.
I might, from now on, I might actually.
yeah, when we overthrew the poet and novelist Saddam Hussein. So now, you know, you'd be like Donner Party, you know, I'm going to start doing something similar, but the opposite. I'm going to say, oh, the heroes, the Donner Party.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say, oh, dirty cannibals.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, you know, the heroes, the Donner Party.
Saved all those kids.
Saved all those children. Wonderful. Story of hope.
You know,
one of our famous moments.
Story of hope.
There's another.
Hey, half of them died, half of them lived.
Almost half of them died. More than half of them lived. The other little sub note, and I'll make this the last thing on this, but like I love the fact that it's named the Donner, the Donner Party and Donner Pass, and we know it as the Donners. When you get into history, George Donner stopped because he had wounded his hand trying to build a wagon wheel, rebuild a wagon wheel. Axle.
I think he's cutting an axle.
He cut his hand and it was festering. So he stopped 6 miles short. George Donner, after which the entire fiasco is named, never even saw the pass.
Yeah, he died.
He died even within view of the pass.
He died of an infection. He got a somewhat superficial cut on his hand. He thought he'd be fine. Dies of an infection.
Yeah,
that's great.
And
never lays eyes on the pass.
That's rich.
And there's a lot. I mean, there's so much more. Like they had, they had gotten into an internal fight on the way and had like a fatality from internal squabbling. And they, I believe it was the Paiute, as they were approaching the pass, the Paiute in Nevada were really whittling away on their livestock. They had all these problems, all these normal problems. I shouldn't say no. Yeah, all the problems typical of people trying to cross, right? They weren't like exceptional, in any way. And then during the gold rush, people resumed flooding over that thing, man, flooding over that pass. And now you're standing there, and there's like the highway doesn't go that way. There's a highway that goes over it. Yeah. There's another highway over it. And you stand there, you look and be like, who in the hell would think you could get a wagon through here?
Yeah, I feel like I've seen the signs.
It is a wicked
it's unreal.
Pass.
It's unreal. I mean, they took the wagons apart and block and tackle pulled them up those cliffs. And now it's like, you're within earshot of people going 85 miles an hour you know, on a freeway. Man.
That's what's so funny. Just driving in to do our work, driving in to film. Like I get into the airport, find a Reno, and start driving up the highway. And you get to a sign and it says like Sacramento, 72 miles.
Yeah.
You're like, well, fuck.
Yeah.
What's the exact problem?
We better make a reservation.
What's the exact problem?
There's a PF Chang's there.
Yeah, seeing that sign and being like in your mind, like, oh shit, an hour we'll be there.
Yeah.
We'll be over the mountains and out the other side and down in the valley in an hour, you know. Then you imagine the shit that, like what that 72 miles meant back then. It's so funny when you're on that highway. Also, I had this like deflated feeling.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh,
it ain't
This
that
is
bad.
cool. This is a cool story.
what pansies? What pansies? Anybody can make it over there. Watch. I'll be there in an hour.
Oh man.
No, it was great. So that's we covered 3.
Yeah. There's 5 more.
So
And,
we did one on the oldest shipwreck in the Great Lakes.
Yeah.
The first ship to sail the Upper Great Lakes.
It's another fascinating story. Yeah.
We did one on the mysteries of the first Americans.
Yeah.
We did one on we should have got into cattle mutilations.
Cattle mutilations is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun too because like there's another one where I know I went in with one perspective,
Oh, yeah.
which was like bullshit.
Yeah, I was like,
And
come
it-
on.
Like you walk away being like, oh, oh boy, yeah.
Yeah. You know what I was thinking about? If we wanted to do a podcast on cattle mutilations, I can't think of which one of the people we talked to would be best to have on about
Oh,
it.
dude, they're all good.
I know we can't have a panel.
Well, you got
is a
enough
rich
seats here
subject.
for most of the people in the.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know if you can fit
How
all
big
their
is the
hats in this
community?
room, but
What else we got, man?
it's a big community. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people out there that
Yeah.
have had these experiences.
Here's one for people. We did one on a thing now known as the Alaska Triangle, which is a portion of Alaska that some argue has like this insane rate of disappearances, aircraft, missing people, ships.
Yeah.
But we examined it through the lens of a particular flight called the Begich Boggs flight, again from the 70s, where the Speaker of the House, Hale Boggs, who, if you're an NPR fan, the journalist Cokie Roberts, who recently passed away, Cokie Roberts, if you ever listened to NPR News and you heard the journalist Cokie Roberts, her father was Hale Boggs. He was the Speaker of the House. Alaska had one congressman, Nick Begich, and the Speaker of the House. So like the Speaker of the House, who's it now? Johnson. Begich and Boggs are on a plane with a congressional aide and a pilot, and the plane goes missing and is still missing today. Has never been found. Most of the search area focused around, the search area for a long time focused around a glacier that they thought perhaps it had gone into a glacier. And you'd be like, what do you mean by that? But we went to a place where a plane, a much bigger plane with many, many more passengers
52.
did get eaten by a glacier and then many years later regurgitated at the toe of the glacier.
It's absolutely fascinating. They crashed this Globemaster, big prop plane,
Military transport
50,
plane.
50 people
Service
on
members on it.
it.
Yeah.
On top of this mountain, it falls into a crevasse, snowed over, and 70 years later, this massive glacier, Colony Glacier, spits it out the bottom, just
Pieces.
shredded pieces of metal.
Every year, every summer, the military goes and they scour the toe of that glacier, and they're still identifying, it would be just finger bones, and they're still identifying service members. And when we flew over it in a helicopter. We didn't want to land there because it's like it's almost like a grave site. Yeah. We flew over after they did this summer's work, and there's orange spray paint circles.
Wow.
All along that glacier. There's not all along, but through a good chunk of that, there's like orange spray paint and markers and arrows and circles where they were recovering debris. The engines came out in big pieces, but a lot of it's just like it pulverized it pulverized it to gravel.
Yeah. So just a massive garbage disposal.
Yeah.
I mean, you think what it does to mountains.
Yeah.
This little plane, man, made of
small
aluminum and
aircraft aluminum.
But what's crazy is on this one, the Begich Boggs flight, the glacier they were looking at, they spent a lot of time on this glacier. The glacier's receded so much, and it's been so long that when you look at the rate of flow of the glacier, you can now rule out that it was in that glacier. Because if it was in that glacier, it would have spit it out by now. But it could spit it out in the bottom of a deep-ass lake.
So this is what like, and this is what's so cool is each little facet of each one of these mysteries has all these permutations, all these possibilities. Like what's cool about that is that glacier, as it kind of came down the mountain and into the basin, dug out a lake that's 800 feet deep.
Dude, this lake, you could paddle a canoe across this lake. Some bitch is 800 feet deep.
It's 800 feet deep.
And one edge of it is just a wall of ice.
Yeah.
So yeah, it could have spat it out into 800 feet of water in little crumpled up pieces. My guess, out the spoiler alert, I think it's in Prince William Sound.
Yeah.
Which is deeper.
Yeah.
And muckier.
And way bigger.
Yeah, I think it's in Prince William Sound. And I'm not like out on a limb when I say that.
Yeah.
But they focus very heavily in one pass and one glacier at first. And this pass, we go through it with a plane. There's a pass where you're like going, it's like the worst pass in the world. Like, you know, a pass, you normally think like a straight thing. It's a pass where you're like, when you're in the worst part of the pass, you got to take a 45, you got to take a 90-degree turn. So you're like going like, sharp left, sharp right to get out of the pass.
You're going up to a head wall and just take a
It's
left.
incredible. You fly to the end of this of turning an arm, right? This massive kind of valley. It's at first a body of water, and then this valley,
Portage Pass,
and then Portage Glacier and Portage Lake, which we were talking about. And as you get to the very end of it, you make a 90-degree turn, and only then can you see whether or not the pass is open. And if it's not open,
you got to check for oncoming aircraft too.
Yeah. And if it's not open, you just got to keep turning and do a 180 and go right back to Anchorage.
When we're sitting there in the pass, we hiked up in the pass and we went down this lake. We're sitting there, and after a while, we watch a plane.
Yeah.
He gets up,
Not good.
comes back, and his head's back to Anchorage. You know, he's like, nope,
not today.
closed up that day. No, the sketchy pass.
Yeah.
But yeah, man. I don't know what date. Yeah, January 28th. If you want to watch the show,
If people are listening to this the day it drops, it is the 20th, so it'll be a week and a day from now, the 28th.
yeah, Mo's gonna do credits.
It wasn't quite the setup. I was like kind of hinting to you. I was like, we'll kind of steer the last part of the
There's a
conversation.
lot of
In all
amazing people
fairness.
involved in this.
Yeah, there are. Listen,
Very
and
talented
I'm
people.
not. Listen, I want to say.
Read the
I want to
names,
say.
Mo.
Still angling
to
for that
Mo's
EP.
credit. Yeah, Mo. And I'm joking. Yeah, talk about who he worked with.
No, I mean, it's again, as we talked about at like the beginning of the show. I'll try to make a segue now. You're not going to do the work.
Okay.
As we talked about at the beginning of the show, it's like there's a lot that goes into these shows. This is not just like it's like, oh, you got a show greenlit, you go out and make it. This is years and years of like grinding.
Yeah.
In what's called the development process. You take a show concept and you develop a deck on it and you pitch it to various networks and so we got to give credit to the people who did that work. It's the hardest part of making TV.
Yeah,
is this development process.
Going way back would be the constant attention of Ben Ford and Mark Pierce.
Yeah, exactly. Ben Ford, Mark Pierce, Bridger Pierce, Chris Richardson, all of the people over at Warm Springs who really like shepherded this project from concept to like something that actually has funding and you're going to go out and make.
And on my end, it was my wife, Katie.
Yep, that's right.
Drove it on my end for a long time.
Who I also need to thank because she's the one that called me.
So I was like, oh, God, don't call Mo. She's like, I always like Mo.
So you have this tremendous group of people here that we got to partner with and work with. And like the part that we do, like that's the fun part. We go out in the field and hang out and go to the cabin and, get to do all the fun stuff, fly around on, glaciers and all that. But on the other side, when we talk about the network, like what was really great about this experience in this show is like we had a tremendous team at the network too. I've had a lot of network experiences. it often is the case that you're getting network notes that are like, don't like this, don't like this, don't like this. It don't like provide any constructive path forward. What's really unique here is working with like Max McAuliffe, Mary Donahue, Alexander Hicks, Eli Lair. Their notes are very, very pointed and very constructive. And it's a huge part of what has made this show successful. It's like, I've never worked for this network before, and instead of coming in and having to like just operate in the blind and figure things out, this is like incredibly, responsive and adept team that's got a blueprint for how you make these shows. And it was a real learning experience for me telling these kinds of narratives.
That's great, man.
So it all around. It's been an awesome experience. I hope we get renewed and can do it again.
It comes out. The show is Hunting History. Comes out on History Channel, 10 p.m. Eastern. I could do the math all the way across the whole country. 9 Central.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens?
8.
8 Mountain.
8 Mountain.
Yeah.
7 Donner.
10 o'clock in the Lost Colony.
And I think if you're in Alaska,
7 o'clock in
it's
Donner.
6 or 5 or something like that. You'll figure it out. You'll figure it out up there in Alaska. On the History Channel. And it follows the show that what's funny is most people we talk to when we're working on our show and we talk about working with History Channel, they bring up how they can't, they don't like to miss Curse of Oak Island.
Yeah.
So it's right after Curse of Oak Island on History Channel. Premiere January 28th, then you can watch for 8 weeks.
Yep. And
Tune in.
Next year we'll make 8 more.
You'll watch the whole thing and never get to see Mo. So you have to watch here if you want to see Mo.
Check him out.
But trust that Mo was there all the time.
It's actually technically not true. I'm
you have a cameo?
bothered. I'm really bothered by one shot in Alaska Triangle where I'm like, I'm in this sweatshirt and I'm trying to, I don't know if I can get over my headphones, but I'm trying to hide in the back of the helicopter like this as we're.
So you had a cameo.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
And you can see me, and it's just like, who is that? Who's the weird dude in the hood in the back of the helicopter?
Your lives are at risk.
Yeah.
There's a skyjacker. He's gonna jump. All right, thanks everybody for tuning in, man, and I hope you check out the show, and I hope you have as much fun watching it as we had putting it together. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.